Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we're really getting into some heavy material, some source documents that lay out, well, the ultimate cosmic stakes.
It's quite a framework. We're talking about a situation where essentially divine justice itself is put on trial. It's waiting for proof from the creatures.
Yeah, and the hook here is intense. Imagine this. If a creator gives a command that's literally impossible to follow and then punishes you for failing, well, who's really the criminal?
Exactly. That question is central to the sources we're looking at. They describe this very precise cosmic mechanism, a way the universe needs to be stabilized after a major rebellion.
A rebellion that introduced doubt.
A deep suspicion, yes. And stabilizing things hinges on proving God's love, proving his commands weren't tyrannical through the actual obedience of his creatures.
So it's like a cosmic courtroom drama. The charge, essentially, is whether God has acted justly. Is the system rigged, or is it fair?
That's a good way to put it. Is the command to love the fundamental law achievable, or is it, as the accuser claimed, impossible? Because if it's impossible,
then the punishment becomes unjust, a setup.
Precisely. So our mission in this deep dive is to walk you through this specific framework. We'll look at why suffering exists in this model, why an ultimate sacrifice was structurally necessary.
And this really specific part about a fixed number of human witnesses, like they're the key evidence.
They are presented as the absolutely crucial evidence, yes. Their testimony is supposedly required to permanently shut down any possibility of future rebellion, even among angels.
Which brings us to the core question we need to tackle. How and when does free will get, well, completed? What does that even mean?
It means the possibility of choosing sin again is just gone, extinguished.
And how do human suffering, death, and resurrection play into convincing, the angels, these celestial powers, that God is actually just and his law is fair?
That's what we need to unpack. It's a complex system, but the sources lay it out step by step.
Okay, let's dive in. Part one. The foundation, justice, love, and this idea of an achievable commandment.
Right. So the starting point in these sources is the law of governance. It's presented as fundamentally simple. The commandment is love. Love God, love your neighbor.
Sounds straightforward enough.
In principle, yes. But the enforcement, that's where the severity comes in. Breaking this law isn't just a mistake. The sources say it incurs a curse.
A curse that leads directly to the lake of fire.
That's the stated consequence. A creature that violates the law of love must be cast out, cast into the lake of fire. Now, we often think of this purely as, punishment after death.
Eternal retribution, yeah.
But these sources add a layer. They give a very practical, almost, sociological reason for why this judgment has to be decisive and, in a sense, immediate within the cosmic legal framework.
Okay, I'm intrigued. What's the practical reason? It's not just anger.
It's framed as protection. The sources are quite blunt. They say if a creature who continually breaks the law, specifically one who crushes their neighbors, meaning they inflict ongoing harm and suffering, if that creature is allowed to continue existing, then the suffering of the victim, the oppressed neighbor, just goes on, indefinitely.
So if God doesn't judge, he's actually enabling the abuse.
He becomes complicit in the suffering by failing to stop the oppressor. Failure to execute judgment becomes a failure to protect the innocent. It's framed as an act of negligence, almost.
So letting someone who lives by, say, malicious self-interest or actively harming others just continue. God would essentially be endorsing that suffering by inaction.
That's the logic presented. Therefore, the judgment casting the unrepentant offender out is defined as a necessary act of love.
Love for the victim.
Primarily, yes. Love aimed at protecting the afflicted, ending the cycle of pain caused by sin. It reframes the judgment not as arbitrary divine anger, but as a non-negotiable protective measure for the community of creation.
Okay, that shifts the perspective significantly. It's less about vengeance and more about maintaining a safe existence for everyone else.
Exactly. It underscores the absolute necessity of this law of love for a functioning, non-suffering reality. And this leads us right to the central problem, the question that, according to these texts, threw the cosmos into crisis, the achievability of the commandment itself. Could a creature actually do this? If this standard, this law of love, is practically impossible for a created being to meet.
Then the whole system breaks down.
Worse, if the standard is impossible, then the creator who punishes the inevitable failure is unjust. The source material uses stark language here. It says the creator who commands the impossible and then condemns the failure becomes a murderer.
Wow. Because the law wasn't designed for life, but guaranteed death, making God responsible for the creature's destruction.
That's the accusation, that the law itself was the weapon. So, for the entire cosmic order to be stable, for any creature, angel or human, past or future, to willingly love the Creator,
They need proof, undeniable proof.
it has to be demonstrably, universally proven that the commandment is a standard creatures can, and the sources use this phrase, amply keep.
Not just barely keep, but amply keep. Comfortably, almost.
The implication is that it's well within the designed capacity if the creature relies on the right resources.
And this proof needs to show that God commanded love, not as some hidden death trap, but genuinely for the creature's own good, to protect them from self-destruction and harming others.
Precisely. It has to demonstrate that the law is protective, not predatory. And the need for this demonstration leads us directly to the origin of the crisis, the counter-argument raised by a key figure.
Hello, identified here as Satan, the adversary.
Yes, and his rebellion wasn't initially like a military coup in heaven. It was primarily a legal and psychological attack. He challenged the fairness of the system itself.
What was his core argument? What did he actually claim that was so persuasive to other angels?
He claimed the commandment, the law of love, was an impossible standard for creatures.
Why impossible?
His argument, as presented, was that because creatures are finite, they have needs, they're subject to their environment, physical limits, they depend on the Creator for existence. The demand for perfect, unbroken love and obedience was inherently too high, tyrannical even.
He suggested only God himself could meet that standard.
Essentially, yes, making it fundamentally unfair to demand it of limited creatures. He framed God's requirement as unrealistic and therefore unjust.
So it wasn't just, I refuse to obey. It was more like, this whole game is rigged against us.
That's exactly it. He sowed doubt about the Creator's fundamental character and fairness, and apparently it worked. Many angels were misled.
The sources say not all joined the rebellion, but they were affected.
They developed suspicion, that's the key word used, suspicion about the commandment itself, and critically, suspicion about the Creator who issued it. Was he truly loving, or was he setting them up for failure?
And that suspicion is corrosive. If they doubt the Creator's motives, their ability to genuinely choose love is compromised, right? Their free will is damaged.
Absolutely. If there's even a hint of suspicion, a lingering doubt about whether God is truly good and fair, they can't offer willing, authentic love. Their obedience might become forced, maybe based on fear or calculation, but not genuine love.
And without that genuine willing love, they can't actually keep the law of love perfectly.
Correct. Which means their free will remains unstable. It retains the potential to sin again, maybe later under different pressures, because the root issue, the lack of complete trust and love, was never resolved.
So the ultimate stability of everything, all future creation, depends not just on defeating the rebels, but on completely removing the suspicion that caused the rebellion in the first place.
You can't build an eternal kingdom on distrust. The foundation has to be proven truth.
Which means the Creator couldn't just issue a decree, he had to provide a demonstration.
A demonstration that proved beyond any possible doubt that the law of love is achievable, even for a creature, even under the worst possible conditions.
And this leads us straight to the role of the last Adam.
The perfect demonstration. The solution had to be as public and deniable as the accusation was.
So the sources frame the cross as this pivotal event, fulfilling a necessary legal and public function.
It had to. It provided two critical proofs. One was direct, addressing God's love and the cost of sin. The other was indirect, addressing hell's claim about the law's impossibility.
Okay, let's break down the direct proof first, the substitutionary atonement part.
This is the ultimate answer to hell's insinuation that God was uncaring or tyrannical. Christ, identified as the last Adam, voluntarily takes the curse for sin. He experiences separation from the Father on the cross.
He pays the penalty himself.
On behalf of sinful creatures, the reference pointed out is Romans 5:8. God shows his love for us in this. While we were still sinners, Christ died for us. It's God taking the hit, proving his love isn't just words.
That settles the "does God love us" question pretty definitively, if he's willing to suffer the consequence himself.
It provides the first verification. But, as we discussed, that alone doesn't resolve the angel's suspicion about the law itself. Was it fair? Could anyone actually keep it? That requires the second, indirect proof.
The demonstration of truth.
Exactly. The last Adam's entire life, culminating in his death, was one of perfect obedience to the Father. He lived the law of love flawlessly. This demonstrated that the commandment is genuine, it is true, and obedience is possible.
Even under extreme pressure.
Even under the maximum possible duress for being in created form, he proved the standard was achievable. He proved Hillel was fundamentally wrong, or rather, lying.
Okay, but here's the tricky part that needs careful explanation. The last Adam is also the second person of the Trinity, divine, infinitely perfect. How does his perfect obedience prove that a regular, finite creature can obey? Isn't that comparing apples and, well, infinite oranges?
That's the absolute linchpin of the argument in these sources. Yes, he is divine. His will is inherently perfect. He cannot sin because he is the standard of goodness itself. However, the critical point is that he took on the form of the last Adam. He inhabited a specific created physical structure, and the sources call this structure cursed flesh, or a body of death.
Cursed flesh. What does that mean in practical terms? Not that his spirit was cursed, surely.
No, not his spirit or divine nature. It refers to the physical body itself, inherited through the lineage of the first Adam after the fall. This body is subject to decay, to pain, to weakness. And crucially, it contains the biological or structural basis for what the texts call fleshly desires.
Okay, define fleshly desires in this context. Are they sinful choices?
Not inherently sinful choices in themselves, no. They're described more as the impulses arising from the physical structure, the drive for self-preservation at all costs, self-interest over the needs of others, the body's resistance to suffering, the pull towards comfort and away from sacrifice. These impulses spring from the dying body.
So the physical machinery itself generates temptation. The divine person within wasn't generating sin, but the house he lived in was constantly sending signals towards self-interest.
Precisely. He was subject to the constant mechanical pull of this body of death, just like any descendant of Adam. His perfect divine will had to continuously operate against the grain of that physical structure's inherent tendencies.
So the demonstration wasn't just, look, I'm morally perfect. It was, look, it's possible to maintain perfect adherence to the law of love, even when operating within this flawed, temptation-generating physical system.
Exactly. He had to prove the law was achievable despite the structural handicap of the cursed flesh. He faced the temptations, the suffering, the threat of death. All the pressures Hillel claimed made obedience impossible for a creature.
Yeah.
And he overcame them perfectly.
Which means his life wasn't just an example, it was literally the blueprint, the functional, necessary way for any subsequent creature stuck in this body of death to achieve victory.
Yes, the sources are clear. He showed the only way. And this way involves three absolutely essential, continuously active elements. They have to work together.
What are they?
First, prayer. Constant, intense prayer. It's presented not just as devotion, but as a structural necessity. A finite creature in a body pulling towards self-interest cannot rely on its own power.
It needs a constant connection to divine power.
It needs constant communication and reliance on the Creator. The sources imply that if a descendant of Adam living in this cursed body stops praying, stops relying, they will eventually succumb to the fleshly desires. The internal power simply isn't enough against the constant pressure.
We see moments like Gethsemane, right? The prayer was so intense, sweating blood. It reads like an existential battle against the body's will to survive.
That intensity reflects the structural requirement. That level of reliance is necessary. The second element flows from this, the Holy Spirit.
The divine power itself.
Victory over these ingrained fleshly desires is only possible through the empowerment of the Holy Spirit. The last Adam, according to these texts, was conceived by the Spirit and lived his entire life empowered by the Spirit. The Spirit provides the supernatural strength needed to override the body's flawed programming.
So without the Spirit, the creature is basically fighting a losing battle against its own biology. The Spirit is the necessary infinite input to overcome the finite flaw.
That's the framework, yes. And the third element is the Word.
Meaning the Scriptures, God's commands.
Knowing, understanding, and actively applying God's revealed Word, the law, the commandment, the truth. For the last Adam, who the texts say is the Word, this meant acting perfectly in line with his own nature and the Father's will. For Adam's descendants, it means using the revealed truth as the absolute guide for every decision, the anchor against temptation.
Temptation often involves twisting the truth, doesn't it? So the word keeps you grounded in reality.
Precisely. Prayer connects you to the power source, the Spirit provides the power, and the Word directs the application of that power correctly. All three are non-negotiable according to this framework.
Okay, connecting this back to the cosmic stakes, you mentioned earlier the sources claim that the very existence of creation depended on the last Adam's guaranteed success.
Yes, the claim is that stark. If the last Adam, operating within this cursed flesh structure, had even a minuscule chance of sinning, the example given is 1%.
Just 1% possibility of failure?
Then the continued existence of all creation would have been impossible.
Why? Why is the certainty that absolute? Is it just about losing the legal argument?
It goes deeper than the legal argument, according to these sources. The second person of the Trinity, the Logos, the Word, he isn't just the moral example. He is presented as the agent through whom reality itself is sustained moment by moment.
Colossians 1, in him all things hold together. That idea.
Exactly that concept. If the very foundation of reality, the sustaining principle, the Word, could potentially be compromised by falsehood, by sin, by failure, then reality itself would be built on a potential contradiction. It would be fundamentally unstable.
Existence can't be sustained by something that might be false.
Existence requires absolute truth at its core. His guaranteed, absolute, infallible perfection, even within the created constraints, was the necessary bedrock for the universe to continue, especially once Hillel had introduced the possibility of divine injustice or failure.
Wow. That puts the cross and the life leading up to it. It wasn't just about saving humanity. It was about ensuring the structural integrity of all reality.
It served multiple cosmic purposes simultaneously, proving God's love, demonstrating the law's achievability, and guaranteeing the foundational truth necessary for existence itself.
Okay, so the last Adam provides the perfect divine proof. But you mentioned the angels needed more. They needed creaturely validation.
Yes. The divine standard was set, the blueprint was provided, but Hillel's accusation was specifically about creatures. Could they, being non-divine, actually follow this blueprint and keep the law, especially under pressure? The angels, plagued by suspicion, needed to see it happen.
They needed to see regular humans succeed where the first Adam failed.
Mortals, Adam's descendants, operating purely by the provided blueprint, relying on prayer, empowered by the Spirit, guided by the Word. They needed to see creatures replicate the victory. This is where the idea of the first fruits harvest comes in.
The first fruits are the proof samples, the validated evidence.
That's the concept. They are the definitive, harvested proof that the process works. And the sources categorize this proof collection into three main stages, linked symbolically to the Old Testament feasts.
Right, you mentioned first fruits of myrrh, Pentecost, and tabernacles.
Correct. Stage 1 is Christ himself, the ultimate first fruit, resurrected, validating the entire plan and the law.
The first one through the door, so to speak.
Exactly. Stage 2 corresponds to Pentecost. This is the harvest of the early disciples, those who received the Holy Spirit, referred to here as the early rain, and formed the beginning of the church, the body of believers empowered to start living this out.
Okay, that makes sense. Early followers empowered by the Spirit. But the crucial stage for settling the angelic doubt, you said, is the third one.
Yes. The third stage, linked to the Feast of Tabernacles, is the final harvest of first fruits, the 144,000.
The specific number again?
The specific number. They are gathered just before the end, receiving what's called the late rain of the Spirit. They represent the completion of the necessary human testimony required to satisfy the celestial court.
But what's the actual mechanism of proof for all these first fruits, including Christ? How is their success formally validated?
The ultimate validation mechanism, according to these texts, is resurrection itself.
Resurrection proves you kept the law. How?
It's presented as the definitive sorting mechanism. If you keep the commandment of love, you conquer the power of death. This leads to the resurrection of life, eternal life, a perfected spiritual existence.
And if you break the commandment,
then you are seized by death. Sin leads to death, and ultimately this path culminates in the resurrection of judgment, which the sources equate with the lake of fire. So, your final state life or judgment literally proves whether you aligned with the law of love or rejected it.
So death is the consequence, unless conquered by obedience to the law of love, proven by resurrection.
That's the structure. However, there's a crucial distinction made within the resurrection of life. Not everyone who attains it experiences it the same way or at the same time. The sources emphasize something called the better resurrection.
Better how?
This is also called the first resurrection. It's specifically the resurrection of the martyrs, the witnesses.
Why is their resurrection better or distinct? What makes their proof so special?
It's considered better because it provides the most undeniable, public, high-stakes testimony. These individuals didn't just live faithfully, they proved they kept the commandment unto death. They actively chose the law of love over their own physical self-preservation when faced with the ultimate consequence. They overcame death by choosing obedience.
Their death was the ultimate statement of allegiance.
And their subsequent resurrection is the ultimate divine vindication of that allegiance. Their reward is also distinct and highlights their special role.
What's the reward?
They reign as king-priests with Christ for 1,000 years. And crucially, they are resurrected 1,000 years earlier than the general resurrection of life.
1,000 years earlier. Why?
That temporal gap underscores the immense value and specific function of their suffering and testimony. Their suffering wasn't meaningless. It was the very mechanism required to provide the incontrovertible proof needed by the cosmos. The early resurrection and reign is their specific reward for providing that crucial evidence.
So the suffering and early resurrection of these martyrs serves a purpose far bigger than their own salvation. It's for the benefit of the entire celestial realm.
Absolutely critical for the celestial realm. The sources explicitly state that the visible resurrection and transformation of these human martyrs permanently eliminates the lingering suspicion held by the angels. Because the angels witness it. They see mortals operating in the flawed, cursed flesh, successfully use the blueprint, prayer, spirit, word, to maintain perfect obedience right up to the point of sacrificial death. And then they see them resurrected. This undeniable, creaturely proof finally settles the cosmic legal case about the law's achievability and God's justice.
Hellel's argument is refuted by evidence.
By living, breathing, resurrected human evidence. And the consequence of this proof is immediate and profound for the heavens.
You said it completes the free will of the angels.
Yes. The first resurrection triggers what the sources call the atonement of the angelic heavens.
Atonement for angels. Did Christ die for them?
No, that's not what it means here. It's not about substitutionary sacrifice for angels. Atonement here is used more in the sense of reconciliation or setting things right in the celestial judicial realm. The books are balanced. The suspicion, the uncertainty introduced by Hellel is purged from the angelic consciousness because the proof is now undeniable.
Their doubts are finally fully resolved.
Their trust in God becomes complete, their love willing and unreserved. And because the root suspicion is gone, their free will becomes permanently stable. The possibility of them choosing to sin in the future vanishes. The heavenly realm is secured.
That's quite something. That beings as powerful as angels needed fragile, dying humans to demonstrate the truth to them, to secure their own eternal stability.
It highlights a fascinating dynamic. The angels might have resisted the initial temptation to follow Hellel, but the logical doubt he planted remained a potential instability. They needed external, empirical proof to overcome that suspicion fully.
And they don't get the 1,000-year kingdom reward because they didn't face that same trial unto death.
According to this framework, yes. Their path to completed free will required them to witness the ultimate victory demonstrated by the suffering, resurrected human martyrs. The human experience, the very frailty and the necessity of sacrifice within the body of death became the crucible for forging the ultimate universe-stabilizing proof.
So human vulnerability wasn't a bug. It was a feature necessary for the demonstration.
It seems that way. It provided the context for the most extreme possible test of loyalty and obedience, the results of which could convince even a skeptical angelic audience.
Which brings us squarely to the 144,000, the final critical piece of that creaturely validation.
Exactly. We've established the cross proved God's love. That's the first verification. But the second verification, proving the law is achievable by creatures under duress, hinges on this specific group.
God decrees this fixed number, 144,000 martyrs or witnesses, to be the final nail in the coffin of Hellel's argument. Why the specific number? Why not just enough witnesses? Why is 144,000 so critical?
The sources present the specificity as crucial for the certainty required. For doubt to be completely eradicated in the angelic realm, there can't be ambiguity. It's not an approximation. It's a precise, divinely guaranteed number. God is essentially staking the outcome, the final stability of creation, on the guaranteed success and perfection of this exact cohort.
They are the final batch of first fruits, the capstone proof.
The capstone, yes. The third and final required set. And the implications of this fixed number are, frankly, staggering according to these texts.
What happens if the number is wrong? Or if?
Yeah.
If just one of them fails?
That's the critical point. If the number isn't met, or if even one single individual designated as part of this 144,000 cohort falls from faith, fails to maintain perfect obedience unto death, then the entire argument collapses.
Just one failure.
Just one. Doubt instantly floods back into the celestial realm. The angels would witness the failure and conclude, see, it is impossible. Hell was right all along. Even God's specially chosen, spirit and empowered group couldn't make it. The standard is too high.
But wait, the sources say this makes the situation extremely favorable to Satan, that if he causes just one failure, he could potentially seize control of creation. How does one person failing lead to Satan winning control? That sounds disproportionate.
Seizing control here seems to mean winning the cosmic legal battle, not necessarily a physical takeover. If Hellel can successfully cause even one of God's guaranteed proof points to fail, he effectively proves his original accusation, that the law is impossible and God is therefore unjust, a tyrant, a murderer for enforcing it.
It validates his entire rebellion narrative.
Exactly. If the standard is proven impossible even for God's chosen witnesses, then God's character is impugned across all creation. Trust collapses. Hell's claim to be resisting an unfair system gains legitimacy. The very foundation of divine authority, which rests on truth and justice, crumbles. Stability is impossible if the ruler is proven unjust by his own test case.
So the 144,000 aren't just witnesses. They're the linchpin of God's legal defense against Hela. Their success must be guaranteed.
Which explains the intense focus on their selection, their trials, and their ultimate perfection. This ties directly into how free will gets completed, particularly for humans, the descendants of Adam.
When does that completion actually happen? Is it at the moment of death or resurrection?
The official validation, the public stamp, comes with the resurrection of life. But the sources strongly suggest that the actual completion, the internal state, is achieved during the trials of life.
Trials are the key mechanism. We talked about the cursed flesh generating lust or desires that lead to sin. Trials must counteract that.
Trials are presented as the purifying fire. They burn away self-serving desire, the lust that gives birth to sin. By enduring trials faithfully, by choosing obedience even when it hurts, the creature learns to prioritize God and neighbor above their own comfort and survival.
They learn the law of love experientially.
And they prove their willingness to obey it unto death. This demonstrated willingness to sacrifice self-interest completely is the mark of completed free will. The personal will becomes perfectly aligned with the divine will.
Okay, but let's revisit that point about the low standard of human martyrdom compared to Christ's agony. That still feels jarring. Giving up your life seems like the highest possible standard.
The sources draw a very specific distinction based on the nature of the sacrifice. For a human martyr, the sacrifice involves abandoning the cursed flesh. This body is already dying, fragile, easily destroyed.
It's temporary anyway.
Right. So giving up this flawed temporary vessel while requiring immense faith and courage is framed as an extremely easy standard compared to what Christ endured.
Which wasn't just physical death.
No. His primary agony, according to these texts, was the spiritual torment of bearing the curse of sin and experiencing separation from the Father. That's an infinite agony that no mere creature could bear or even comprehend. The human martyr, empowered by the Spirit, only needs to meet the creaturely requirement, demonstrate their will to obey by sacrificing the physical life.
So the pass-fail criterion is showing the required level of obedient will, not achieving infinite perfection or enduring infinite suffering.
Precisely. God sets an achievable finite standard for the creature. And this brings us back to why the 144,000 are so crucial and why their success is guaranteed.
Because their number is fixed and their victory is predetermined.
Yes. The sources imply that because their success is a divine necessity for cosmic stability, their free will is either already completed through their past faithfulness and trials, or it's guaranteed to be completed rapidly and perfectly through the final, intense trials they face. The guarantee of their victory exists before their final act of martyrdom.
Is that why they receive the late rain of the Holy Spirit? Because their wills are already aligned?
That seems to be the logic. The late rain is bestowed upon them, ensuring their absolute faultlessness in the final test, precisely because their wills have already been perfected through obedience to the point where they are guaranteed not to resist the Spirit's leading, even when facing death. They have already made the irreversible choice for God.
They become the flawless, guaranteed living and dying evidence.
The perfect refutation of Hillel. So the ultimate result. Once these 144,000 complete their testimony, they die, and they experience the first resurrection. The angels witness this undeniable proof.
and their free will is finally, irrevocably completed.
They see mortals, in weak flesh, achieve perfect obedience through the Spirit. They now fully trust God, love Him without reservation. Suspicion is gone forever. Their wills are stable, complete. The possibility of another heavenly rebellion is extinguished.
Okay, we've thrown around completed free will a lot. Let's clarify what that actually means for the creature post-completion. They don't become God, right?
Absolutely not. That's a critical distinction the sources maintain. Limited righteousness versus infinite righteousness. Only the last Adam, being God, is infinitely righteous, has infinite love, is infinitely beyond the possibility of sin. Sin is, by definition, falling short of His standard.
But the creature, angel or human, even after their will is completed, is still finite.
They remain creatures. Completion doesn't mean they suddenly have infinite capacity or knowledge. It means their will is now permanently aligned with God's within their created limits.
So what's the requirement for them? How are they judged righteous if they aren't infinitely so?
Their requirement is to love God and neighbor up to the level defined by God for their specific creaturely nature. They pass the test set for them, not an infinite test.
So if they demonstrate, through obedience and reliance on the Spirit, their unwavering commitment to that standard-like sacrificing physical life when required, God considers their will complete and deems them righteous within their sphere.
Exactly. They've proven they can permanently overcome self-interest, the root of sin, within the bounds God established for them. Their freedom is perfected in choosing perfect alignment with God's finite requirements for them.
For humans, you outline two paths to this completion, based on the type of evidence they provide. Path A was the martyrs.
Path A, the martyr first resurrection path. These are the key witnesses, including the 144,000. They obey right up to the point of sacrificing their lives. This act is the ultimate public proof that their free will is completed. They get the reward of the first resurrection and the 1,000-year reign because their testimony served that vital cosmic judicial function.
Providing the undeniable evidence needed for the angels.
Yes. Then there's Path B.
Path B, the life resurrection path. This is for everyone else who lives faithfully but isn't called to martyrdom.
Correct. These individuals maintain faith and obedience throughout their lives, relying on the Spirit, enduring their own trials. They will achieve the resurrection of life, but later after the 1,000 years.
So their free will must also be completed during their life, right? Otherwise, they wouldn't persevere in faith.
Logically, yes. Their completion happens internally through their lifelong journey of obedience, prayer, reliance on the Spirit, and overcoming personal trials that chip away at selfish desires.
But if their will is completed too, why don't they get the same early resurrection and reward as the martyrs?
Because their victory, while real and essential for their own salvation, is primarily internal. It's unseen by the celestial court. No creature can definitively know the state of another's heart or will.
It doesn't serve as public evidence.
Exactly. It's not the public, legally binding proof required to settle the cosmic debate. So their completion is officially validated and rewarded when they receive their perfected spiritual body in the general resurrection of life at the end of the 1,000 years. They passed their test, but they weren't the designated legal witnesses.
So the difference is function, the role they played in the cosmic drama, not necessarily a difference in their eventual completed state.
That seems to be the implication. The sources might mention someone like Daniel, who faced martyrdom but was delivered. Internally, his will might have been proven, but his survival meant he didn't provide the same final public evidence as someone actually resurrected after death for their faith.
Okay, last crucial point on this. The mechanism of choice. If God needs this outcome, why not just make everyone's will complete? Why the insistence on creaturely choice, especially if Hell is trying to sabotage it?
Because forced completion isn't genuine completion. The sources are adamant. God does not interfere with or override the creature's free will. The whole point is demonstrating that creatures can choose righteousness.
The perfection has to be voluntary.
It must be a choice. Free will reaches completion, according to this model, when the creature makes two continuous conscious choices. First, the choice not to reject God's offer of grace and the path of redemption He provides.
Accepting the help offered.
Yes. And second, the choice to strictly and constantly obey the guidance of the Holy Spirit.
So it's an active partnership. The creature chooses obedience.
And that act of choosing obedience allows the divine power, the Spirit, to work effectively within them, overcoming the pull of the cursed flesh and the temptations of the adversary. It's not passive. It's an active surrender of self-will to the divine will, moment by moment.
And this chosen obedience has to be absolute for the key witnesses, the 144,000.
Especially for them. Their guaranteed reception of the late rain and their guaranteed victory rests on the fact that their prior choices and trials have already perfected their will to a point of irreversible alignment. They will choose obedience. Always.
Their free will is completed because their choice for God is now absolute and unwavering.
That structural certainty victory, guaranteed, yet founded on perfected creaturely choice, is the final devastating refutation of Hela's claim that creatures couldn't freely choose obedience. And it's the mechanism that stabilizes the universe.
Which makes the number 144,000 not just symbolic, but the required quantity of successful, validated choices needed to close the case.
The necessary quantum of evidence to achieve permanent celestial peace and certainty.
Okay. We have covered a huge amount of ground here, tracing this specific framework from the initial law of love through the crisis of suspicion, the divine demonstration by the last Adam, and finally, the crucial creaturely validation by the martyrs, specifically the 144,000.
It really paints a picture of a universe where justice isn't just assumed, but had to be rigorously proven. The stability of everything required both the ultimate divine sacrifice, settling the question of God's love, and this ultimate creaturely proof settling the question of the law's achievability raised by Hela.
And the linchpin was demonstrating that the law of love is achievable, even by mortals in flawed bodies, choosing obedience right up to death. The entire piece of heaven depended on that human demonstration.
It leads to that concluding thought in the sources, that the angels, who once doubted, now intensely study and desire to understand these events, the gospel, human suffering, the resurrection. They watch because their own eternal security was ultimately guaranteed by what happened with humanity.
Which leaves us, and you the listener, with a really provocative final thought to chew on. If the highest beings, the angels, needed their own free will completed and secured by the obedience unto death of seemingly fragile humans, what does that tell us about the fundamental nature of love, choice, and maybe even power?
Why was the apparently weakest link humanity in a body of death the chosen instrument for providing the strongest, most absolute, eternally binding proof for the entire cosmos? Perhaps, as the sources imply, that very vulnerability wasn't a flaw in the plan, but the essential ingredient needed for the ultimate, undeniable demonstration of chosen love.